trash talker on social media and involved in New York City local waste advocacy.
Very cool. And thank you so much for coming to this event today. I'll talk a little bit louder than normal since we don't have amplification today, so let me know if you can't hear me. For the event, I know that a lot of folks got here at 4, and we had pizza, we had cocktails, we went around the circle and met each other, and then we also started a clothing swap in the conference room right down the hall. So now we're just going to have a chat. Anna and I are going to talk a little bit about the work that we do, ask each other some questions, and then we're also going to do Q&A from the audience. So if there's anything that you all want to know more about or dig in on, we're going to talk about that as well. And then when that is done, we're all going to go mingle back in the conference room and do more clothing swappage. So,
are we doing any? Is there going to be an excerpt from the film show, the Netflix film showing today?
So the goal was to show the trailer for the documentary that Anna is in, but unfortunately, the technology hasn't worked out behind us, so we won't see an excerpt from that film. But that is the first thing we're going to talk about. Is that okay? Awesome. So welcome to everybody. I know there's a few new folks that joined. Would love to get to know your name and meet you once we're at the clothing swap. But just to jump in for the sake of time, my first question is going to be for you. Tell us a little bit about the film that, the documentary that you're in and what the experience was like and anything you want to share about being part of it.
Yeah, I'll also try to speak a little bit louder than I normally do. So I'm in, by now, The Shopping Conspiracy that just premiered on Netflix yesterday. And it's been a multiple year process of getting contacted, the conception of it, different iterations, filming it, and so I'm excited that it's finally out to the public. Also, the first time that I saw it was right before it was shown, so there was this lot of curiosity on my end of what was included. And I actually didn't even know the full scope of the story or the cast of characters, but it's really focused on corporate waste and putting the blame, which has, I think, shifted way too much to the individual, to the quote-unquote consumer, and putting the blame back onto corporations and saying, you're the problem and you're overproducing knowingly, and you're creating this crisis of waste, this crisis of exceeding planetary boundaries, harming individuals, harming animals, and they're polluting our planet, impacting our health. And it never says the word capitalism, but I think is smart actually, because that word is alienating and means different things to different people. But it's saying that our current system, reliant on constant consumption, is inherently not sustainable. And these former executives, major corporations like Adidas, are speaking, and some high-ranking officials, one high-ranking official at Amazon, are speaking out now, saying that we've got to change.
Yeah. And why do you care about this?
Well, so many reasons. I think that if you live on this planet, you should be caring about it because it is our future, right? And it is future. It is unfair to future generations, and it's also unfair to people who are alive now. I went to last year. I had the privilege of going to Accra, Ghana, with the War Foundation, which is featured partially in the documentary. The scenes in Ghana with the clothing waste, these clothing waste that come onto their beautiful shorelines, onto their beaches, and it's heartbreaking to see that, and to see that this, instead of seaweed coming up from the shore, it's these tanks of clothing, and so no one truly should be living in those conditions, and then also there's this, I think the more you go into it and the more that you learn about the upstream effects, in addition to the downstream effects, where does the clothing go to and how does it negatively affect people, the upstream effects, I watched the True Cost documentary, and then after that I was okay, I'm done with fast fashion, because I think once you see the harm it's doing to the people producing the clothing who are living in poverty and who are working in terrible conditions, you realize you can't continue participating in these systems. And so my whole thing is like, the systems are collapsing around us, and I think it's my hope with the film also is that it will spark and shift some things so that we can imagine new systems and abandon this current one that we're in.
So I watched the film last night. How many of you had a chance to watch it? I know it just came out yesterday, so one. Is anyone planning on watching it? Yeah. So the thing that really surprised me the most about the film was there are executives featured in the film from Adidas, Amazon, Apple, and another company. But the thing that they all said that was really surprising to me, and I don't know where everyone is at on their waste journey in their lives, but the thing that surprised me the most was how much the folks who were in these roles at Adidas or at Amazon is that they said that they didn't know the problem that they were creating as they were creating it. And so now they're taking time to try to undo what they've done, undo what they've been a part of. And so that was the thing that really took me most by surprise. And so I'm curious, like, when you all watch it, like, if there's anything that stands out to you, because it actually was making me kind of upset. Like, how can you not know that producing, 50,000 new SKUs a year is not going to be a great thing to do for the planet, right? So,
Yeah, I think also if you want to share about your experience working for Postmates and then Uber, I think that from what I've heard from you, you have a very strong internal moral compass, and just you consistently decided when something doesn't align, you quit, which I think is like kind of a rarity to do.
Yeah, so I was the 15th employee at Postmates, and I was there for a decade, all the way up to our acquisition by Uber. And very early on in the tech scene, I was starting to see all of these people who were being left behind by the tech scene, people who weren't being included, the early problems with the tech scene that are still inherent, if not more today. There's a million examples we could point to on why there's so many problems in tech. And I really thought that I could change it from the inside. And so when I joined a company like Postmates really early on, I was so hopeful, I was so young, I was 21 years old, I was ready to take on the system, and I didn't realize how naive I was about what that actually was going to look like from the inside. And so I went in, I did the best that I could with the resources that I had allocated to me, but after a few years, it just wasn't working. It wasn't what I wanted to do, and I never wanted to be someone who could look back on my life and say, wow, I wish I would have done something different when I had the chance to do that. So I quit, and I went and worked at a nonprofit. I'm a vegan animal rights activist in my free time, and I've been vegan since I was 17, and that's from a video that I saw from Mercy for Animals when I was 17 years old. And so when I had the opportunity to join them and help them start a lab-grown meat company, I was like, wow, like, this is the future. This is a way we can use technology to, like, change the way that this environmental degradation is happening. And I really wanted to be a part of that. And it was a great organization, but it was a real shock to the Postmates team that I was really going to quit, that I really did it, that I really left. And then it took about a year before I realized, wow, there's a lot of problems in the nonprofit space as well. There's a lot of underfunding. There's a lot of lack of access to products that would make you be able to do your job better. You shouldn't have to sit in a crappy chair that hurts your back just because donor dollars aren't allocated to go to things that aren't programmatic funds. And so there was a lot of holes and flaws in that system as well that I realized firsthand. And so I was asked to come back to Postmates after about a year, and the negotiation that was made there was really around, if you come back, you can build out our social impact program and do whatever it is that you want with Tech for Good at Postmates. And I was like, that is a deal that I think is worth taking, because I do really believe that technology and the scalability of it is what is going to make an impact for big businesses and corporations, which ultimately are the ones, in my opinion, that are responsible for the end of life or the extension of life of these products. So I rejoined, I fixed some of the problems that were going on within the company, and then I started building out what are the different pillars of the platform that we were going to support as a tech for good company. And so we built a food security platform, we built a disaster relief platform, and we built a volunteering platform. And we got all of our employees volunteering. At one point, we actually had 72% of the Postmates employees actually going out and doing volunteer events in a year. And I believe the national average for a volunteer program is around 20%. So we were just shooting it out of the roof. And I felt like we were really introducing people to the problems and the people in their community that were experiencing problems. A lot of it because of gentrification, because of the different pay differentials, because of the way that tech was moving into different parts of the city. So I felt very compelled when the person from Adidas and the person from Amazon, they were like, I just had no idea. And it's like, I find that hard to believe that you have no idea that you're causing a problem within your company while you're doing it. Because I think you know. And the thing is now the former CEO of Adidas, who's in this film, he's walking on a beach in the movie, and I'm like, it's like a pristine beach. And I don't know if the filmmakers did that as a way to push it against what's going on in Ghana. But this guy had nothing to lose. He was a wealthy white dude who was able to work at Adidas his whole life and then quit or get fired or whatever. And now he's paying his penance here. And it's just what did you actually sacrifice in order to get where you are today? And I know that there's a lot of people in positions who aren't able to do that. But if you have the power and the opportunity to really make it hurt. If you're a really good employee somewhere and you quit, they're gonna feel that, and they might come back to you with an offer that is what you want or what you need in order to actually change something. So I know that didn't work for the person from Amazon in the film. They did get fired when they spoke out, but she really sacrificed something in order to stand up for what she believed in. So.
Yeah, I think that was the theme of the film. Well, for me, it was that people try to operate with the system, but cannot change it from within. You can try, but ultimately, when your system is you're a corporation beholden to your shareholders, and you're being tracked on a quarterly basis, and you have to meet these quarterly expectations of profitability, and your profitability is supposed to be aligned to infinity. That system, it is inherently not changeable. If those are all the measurements of success, if those are the measurements of accountability, that this is going to be the end. What we currently have, which is ultra hyper consumption and disregard for environmental and human and animal harms. So I think that to me that's what one of the things that came across is you can try to work from within, but ultimately I love composting as a cycle, and I think it's inspirational and can be applied to so many other areas of life where you're taking something and you're combining it with these other things, and then from that form of death, new life emerges. And so I think the idea of composting the system really appeals to me, because it's saying that this is we're in this form of death right now, and we could continue further down this path of death, or we could take it and rebuild it and turn it into life. Through this cooperation, not just of humans, but of all the species in the world, and through looking at, I'm taking this course called Zen and the Art of Saving the Planet, And they talk about interbeing. Like we don't just exist, we interexist. We're interbeing with everything around us. And like that's the system that I want to compost into. The system of of short-term profitability and human kind of exceptionalism and superiority, to one that's a lot more holistic and recognizing where we fit into time and space and in relation to all the other things that exist on this living planet.
Yeah. This is like one of the reasons I really like having forums like this and relationships with people like you, is because I find it so interesting to see and hear how other people think about these problems and like how they are like long-term versus short-term. And from being someone who really believes that we can change it from within the system if you're willing to actually make the sacrifices, like I think I've just seen it from a different perspective, where I think if the CEO of Adidas would have said, no, we're going to make all of our shoes out of compostable materials, figure it out in the next 3 weeks, like we would have compostable shoes from Adidas in 3 weeks from the time that they would have asked for it. Like we didn't need Yeezys, you know? So
Yeah.
so I'm a big believer in like, I think there are ways that you can work within the system in order to change it, but it is difficult and it's not always going to work. So
Yeah. Can you share how Liquid Donate is addressing the flaws inherent currently in the retail system?
yeah, of course. So with Liquid Donate, we've built a software platform that matches all of the excess inventory that retailers have with the schools and nonprofits that need these items. I think that the work that we do is really figuring out this matching problem. Like there's somebody who has a size 11 pair of shoes that they do not want, and there is someone who's like, I would love a pair of those size 11 shoes in that color scheme. We just don't know who those two people are and how to match them together. And so what we've built with Liquid Donate is this software that solves that matching problem, where we can do it on the consumer level, like things like this clothing swap, or things like you can donate from your door at home with Liquid Donate. You can do this on an individual basis, but the focus that we really have and what we work on in terms of scale is actually working with the retailers that are doing all of this overproduction. And there's a ton of reasons why there's overproduction, which we can get into. But inherently, like the problem exists that this inventory sits in a warehouse today, or it gets shipped to a customer and then they want to make a return on that inventory, and now it gets shipped all the way back across the country just to be opened up, to be thrown in a pile that goes into the landfill. Like it's a very inefficient system. And so what we've done is we've built a tool that matches it in bulk from the warehouse. So if it's a CPG product, a consumer packaged good, like hockey sticks, for example. If there's a product that's considered short dated, like it has less than 30 days of shelf life left, most grocery stores will not even accept that product into the grocery store. And so now these retailers who are in brands are stuck with this inventory, and they normally would have to take it to the landfill. But if they're using us, we can actually give them a routing and a heading exactly from where that truckload of that product needs to go today. And so we can match and move that product within the realm of the timeline that they have, because we built out this software that is able to take the item and match it. The other thing with the returns piece that I find really interesting, and I know the film didn't go into the returns piece, but something that we've seen as a huge problem is you buy something, you want to ship it back, they're going to throw it away. The film does cover like recycling means like a lot of times it's going in the trash and then or being incinerated, which up to 80% of returns today end up in the landfill or being incinerated. Like that's way too much. And so what we did is that we actually intercepted at the customer's home. So let's say you have this shirt, you want to return it. If the retailer is working with Liquid Donate, instead of getting a shipping label to a back to the warehouse where they're just going to open it, throw it in the trash, transit it to the landfill, instead of all of that, we instantly produce a shipping label for a nonprofit within about 35 miles of the customer's home, anywhere in the United States or Canada. And so now your item is instantly going from your home to a local nonprofit that wants that specific item on a one-off basis. And our system has been able to calculate all of the transit distances and cost and speed and all of those things, and the item counts. Do they have a loading dock? Do they not have a loading dock? Can they accept a pallet, a truckload? Like, what is the capacity of this nonprofit? Is it an individual person running this nonprofit that is running it out of their one-bedroom apartment? They probably don't want a truckload of product, And so we've tried to decrease the complexity of what happens between someone saying, I don't want this thing anymore, and someone saying, I need that thing or I want it as well, so that we can really do like what we call an extension of life. In the film, they talk a lot about end of life, and I think that end of life is something that is really important. And when we were having lunch, we were talking about the EPR.
Oh, extended producer responsibility.
So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that too, because it's not like we focus on extension of life. Like, how do we make sure that this product that still has usable life and condition in it gets into the hands of someone else who needs or wants it, so that we don't have to buy another one or produce another one. But what do we do with it after that? And that's where we eventually see a longer term scale of working on the regulation side as a company, just like we did with Postmates on the contractor issue. And how do we work with regulation on a state-by-state basis to say, like, we've helped extend the life of this product by getting it to someone else, but is there a QR code? Is there an appropriate disposal destination for these things? And so I'd love for you to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so extended producer responsibility is a legislative tool. To what the thesis of the film is shifting the responsibility for a product back from the individual to the corporation. And so we see it in New York with paint. And actually, I don't know if people understand that that's a law, and it's a state law saying that the place where you sold this paint must now accept it back. So now people, if you have these old cans of paint or leftover paint that you just from painting your room, you can bring back those cans, and then the retailer needs to responsibly dispose of it. And then another form of EPR in New York State is with the electronics take back. So if you have TVs, computers, keyboards, whatever, you can bring them back to Best Buy and Staples, and they're not accepting that because of the goodness of their heart. They're accepting that because it's a law, it's a state law. So those are a form of extended producer responsibility, shifting the onus for responsibility from the individual and by extension from the municipality back to the corporation. And one form where I would like to see it is on clothing. So it could take different forms. With clothing, ideally, it would be an extra fee that the retailer or the individual would pay. So if you're buying a new shirt that costs $5, you would have an additional extended producer responsibility fee. It can range, but ideally you would make it like at least a couple dollars, in my opinion, and then that would support the end of life. So one of the issues in Accra, Ghana, is that they're receiving a huge volume of clothing each week. I think it's something like 17 million per week.
Yeah.
Pieces of clothing, and
there's only 30 million residents.
Yes, so it's just it's a lot, too much. But they're not receiving any of the funding also to go with it, right? So if they receive the clothing plus funding for infrastructure, that would result in a lot better systems for everyone involved. Right now there's no incinerator in Accra, there's no landfill in Accra. So you come up with informal solutions which are really harmful. But ideally, you would have a fee for any new clothing that's produced, and that money would then follow the item at the end of life and support all the ways in which it's then being reused. And so some of that money would flow to Accra, Ghana, and that's what's, I think, fair. And I also do think we need to make clothing more expensive. Like if you look since the 90s, what's gotten more expensive? Housing has gotten way more expensive. Education has gotten way more expensive. Clothing has gotten cheaper. even when you compare it with inflation, clothing has gotten cheaper, and it's gotten cheaper because we're cutting corners and we're abusing the planet and people. And so I think it's appropriate to make it more expensive, and it's appropriate for that extra fund, the extended producer responsibility fund, to then support the secondhand market and grow it, because if we were actually collecting all the clothing that is in existence, the majority of it gets thrown out at the moment. Majority of it does not get donated. But if we were actually collecting it, we would need a lot more space. We would need warehouses. We would need upcyclers. We would need more textile to textile recycling technology, because that's really in its infancy. It doesn't exist at scale. It's very expensive. So supporting all of that, supporting people who are on the receiving end, so that we're not, when we're donating clothing, we're not actually harming other people, which is the current paradigm, unfortunately, in some cases.
Yeah, absolutely. Questions?
Yeah. Does anyone have any questions? I also have more questions for you if you want to go into. Yeah.
Can you talk about the difference between upcycling and
Recycling?
I think you mentioned two things after the
Upcycling, recycling,
Downcycling?
and landfill.
oh,
Donation.
Okay, so maybe talk about the upcycling.
Yeah. Do you want to go first?
No, if you have examples.
Yeah. So upcycling, in my definition of upcycling, is taking something that had an original intended use and turning it into something else. Like, so being able to take fabric from like textiles from clothes that you don't want anymore and turning it into a dress or a handbag or something else. So you're turning something that was something else into a new usable product. Do you agree?
Yeah.
And so I think there's actually quite a few folks in the room who are familiar with upcycling. So if you want to jump in on any other parts of the definition, feel free. But one of the things that our software does, and our goal is to make sure that, like, we call it all disposition outcomes. Like, we make sure that the item is going for the appropriate disposition outcome for that product. And so if it is something that is soil, we don't want to get that donated to a nonprofit. That's not an appropriate thing to donate to them, right? And so instead of sending that to a nonprofit and expecting them to just dispose of it on their own time and money, we would route that to an appropriate facility, which would most likely be a landfill, until there are facilities that are actually able to clean these products at scale and then turn them into things like thread, so that they can be made into additional new material. Just the crisis of and the scale of this problem is so big and so bad that whatever portion of this we can chip away at today is what we're focusing on, and seeing what we can do to divert things from the landfill. And in the past 3 years, we have diverted over 11 million items from the landfill that otherwise would have gone there. So the other thing about technology that the EPR stuff reminded me of is, so in Europe, they're doing a lot of EPR work, and the QR code is really like the way that they're doing it, and I think that's really interesting. Is like on the tag of your clothes, you would have a QR code, and it would like actually track everything that has happened, all of the money that has been put like toward this item, because who's gonna keep a receipt, especially a paper receipt for something that they bought at H&M for $5, like until the end? How do we make sure the money gets to where it needs to go for the upcycler? And it's like the only way to do that is through technology. Like if we want to really do it at scale. And so I think there's like, I think there's a really interesting connection between what has to be done on the activist community and what needs to be done in the technology community, and like supporting both of those at the same time. Like a lot of people probably see that as like disparate, but to me, I think they have to go together.
Yeah, France has a form of extended producer responsibility for clothing right now, and it's basically at the point of sale when you're buying the item, they charge you that fee. One of the issues about France's model is that money stays within France. that's one of the issues. Another issue is there's like really not a lot of traceability about where is this money going. So it becomes a pot of money, and then what happens to it, and there's very little public information about what happens next. And so those are some things to look for when you're talking about EPR legislation. You have to be critical of it too. You have to say it can't just be you collect the money and then don't support what happens next. It can't just be that you collect the money and then don't share what is it funding, where is it going. So I hope as we hopefully in New York State and other parts in the U.S., I think it's going to have to be a state-by-state push, but I think those are things to keep in mind as we consider EPR legislation is like, how can we make this the best possible version and learn from other countries' mistakes?
Kind of on that topic, this is really two questions. But when we talk about extended producer responsibility, like you're saying, there's potentially a cost ideally to the manufacturer of the brand, but that cost often gets passed on to the consumer, which is just, their margin isn't changing. So the first part of the question is, how do we pressure brands or corporations or manufacturers to actually take the onus that we're supposedly giving them, and not just pass on that extra cost onto the consumer, is the first part. And the second part is, when we look at EPR specifically, and especially in California with the new legislation that's passing, it's really great to have kind of a pot of money that's meant for the end of life of these items, but there's currently not infrastructure, especially not in the US and even not so in Europe either, that can actually commercially scale textile to textile recycling or even like proper donation or reuse or repair or anything like that. And so how do we also make it so that the brands or corporations or manufacturers, anyone, kind of like, there's no, to my knowledge, and I'd be happy to learn if there is any legislation that requires them to kind of give that money to private entities that are working to solve those problems. And there's not a lot of government grant funding out there either for people to actually solve those problems. And so not looking for a solution, but just looking to discuss, like, how do we make some of that stuff happen?
Well, my answer may be, I hope it doesn't come across as too callous, but like, in terms of the fee, we can afford it. And what is the alternative? The alternative is continuing to stay in these systems that are unfair, but it's not unfair to us, it's unfair to people like those in Accra, Ghana, who are in the receiving end of these donations and who don't have the infrastructure to actually handle them. And so we absolutely can afford to absorb those fees. Ideally, the corporation will be paying it for it, but if not, the individual has to. I think it's not optional, and I think that if you can afford, quote unquote, to spend $5 on a T-shirt, you can afford to spend another $1 or $2 also on supporting the end of life infrastructure for that T-shirt. I don't have a lot of sympathy for Americans and Americans who buy fast fashion.
Right.
So, but ideally, yes. Ideally, the cost would be absorbed by corporations. I don't know if I think typically a lot of times when that happens, corporations still find a way to put it back onto the individual, maybe by raising prices a little bit. I guess I'm okay with both options because I think it needs to happen, and I think corporations can afford it, and also the individual can afford it too. If you're living in America, you're buying fast fashion, you can afford it. I don't have a lot of sympathy for that.
I have a different opinion.
Okay, tell me. Tell me.
So, I think there's going to be a number of ways that this gets settled that are going to be far beyond us. But I think that the people that are in this room are the people who are going to be helping to guide and push this legislation. And I would say that the amount of clothing that exists in the world today is enough clothing that we could stop producing clothing for the rest of how many generations?
I've heard 6.
6 generations, and we would have enough clothing for everybody who lives today and who will continue to be born for the next 6 generations. And so for me, once again, it goes back to this matching problem. So instead of saying we should be making it more expensive to buy new clothes, like I think that's an option. But at the same time, like there are people who are making decisions between buying a new shirt at H&M for their kids so that they don't feel like they're going to be made fun of at school or something. Like there's like all these like little like side cases where I'm like, what if we could just match the existing $5 H&M T-shirt that kid wants, like with them? Like it already exists. Somebody else already like bought it 10 years ago. Like to me, it's once again, it's like how do we match what already exists instead of having to produce more? So I would say, maybe my answer is even harsher, which is like stop clothing production altogether.
No, I would love that. I would love that. And I think, but for me, one of the ways in which we actually bring down consumption is by making items more expensive so that you're not, if it costs as much as a cup of coffee, something's gone wrong. And you're not going to think about it enough because you're like, well, this is $5. And then at the end of the life, you're going to be like, well, it doesn't matter. It's like new with tags. I never wore it, but like, I'm just going to toss it because it costs $5, whatever. Like that is the paradigm we need to move away from. And I very much support, like clothing should not be this cheap. And it's this cheap because people didn't get paid and because the environment was harmed.
Can I? Sorry.
Yeah.
Can I just add?
Yeah.
I want to clarify a little bit. So I completely agree with you. I am like of the mind that as consumers, especially in my, stature and my income level and all that stuff, we need to be more materialistic. We need to care more about the things that we're purchasing. We need to spend more on them. We need to be more mindful of all that stuff. I'm totally with you. I think my question was really about when we think about EPR, it's meant to be a fee for the brand or the corporation as a penalty for overproduction or as a penalty for producing any type of volume, right? And so if they pass that cost onto the consumer, it really isn't, it's not doing its purpose. And so I think the reason I asked the question, or the reason I, wanted to start the discussion is like, how do we make it so, or how do we put pressure on brands so that they are feeling the penalty and they are feeling the consequence of overproduction?
I feel like it's something that has, like, there needs to be portraits, CEO corporation, and not to have to yourself at the expense of the environment. So there needs to be something in about percentage of so that instead of being passed on to the customer, it's passed on by bringing down that cost.
Like realigning the incentives.
Yeah. We can't continue to let go at the expense of the environment. That's not sustainable. You can't have 30 trillion years. It's not sustainable.
I have a kind of interesting / funny / depressing anecdote that dovetails to the comment. I went to Première Vision, like the textile trade show over the summer, and like I'm interested in next generation materials, sustainable materials used in clothing, textiles. But there were about 4 brands who were creating those materials among the thousands of polyester completely manufactured. And there was a lecture on like sustainable materials and upcycling and recycling in it. And there were about 10 people in the room.
Wow.
And then the talk that followed it was about colors and trends, and the room was packed, and there were hundreds of people in the room, and I said it should have been swapped. But I'm also interested in like your work and your concerns seem to be rooted in like post-consumer waste, which is huge, and it's all about our behavior. But I'm also interested in like manufacturers because they also produce a lot of waste and end of roll and offcuts and dead stock, and I think there's a lot of richness there because it's unused material. It still can be considered like raw or virgin material, and I think that's a space that I'm interested in like recuperating that waste. And like the clothing waste is horrific and it's like such a behavioral thing, but I'm interested in like accountability for on the manufacturer's side,
Yeah.
and like I've heard about companies now including like traceability within their textiles from the start, like from the
Yeah.
plant growth itself to when it becomes an actual textile. But do you work with like this lipidonates
Yes.
involved like manufacturers
Yeah.
products?
Yeah, so one of the things that we do is we want to provide a solution to the retailers today so that they can actually start doing something about the problem that they've helped to create today. And so we made it easier than throwing it away for them to start donating and getting this material to the appropriate disposition outcome for that inventory. And so when I think about what I want my like mark on this world to be, I want it to be that like I did something like every day that I could have done something. And so that's why I focused on what's the easiest, cheapest, fastest, most efficient way that I can do something to fix this problem today. And then how can I use the data that I collect over the next 3 to 5 years to work backwards into the supply chain, because I'm not going to change the supply chain overnight. And so once we're able to go back to a retailer and say, hey, did you know that because of using our service, you saved $7 million like over the past 2 years? Like, do you think maybe like you could produce less of that stuff? Like, did you know that like you even had this much excess material? Like, we believe that we can even get down to the data in such a into such a science that we'll be able to tell retailers before they even produce an item if it's going to have a high return rate or not, based on the data that we've aggregated across returns from all industries and all consumer behavior. Because right now, every retailer only has access to the returns for their brand, but we are assigning these customers a code and then tracking them across Shopify, Narvar, Optoro, every returns platform. And so we know, like, okay, customers that are female, age 24 to 26 in Ohio are unlikely to buy this product, so don't market it there, don't even produce it, don't even sell it there. Like, that's the type of targeting. It's like the anti-Amazon model. It's like, don't buy now. It's like they won't buy it. And so in an ideal world, that's really what we would be able to get to, is a point where we're actually helping them make decisions that are further upstream. I think that's the right direction, upstream. Never good with fish analogies. So yeah, I'm very passionate about that, but at the same time, like, I know you have to show people results today in order to get them to do the next hardest thing, which is going to be changing the way that they've bought, ordered, done procurement for all of these other years. How about you? You care a lot about this.
What was I lost the original question.
About the we talk a lot about post-consumers.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think that goes to the upstream stuff about them making it. I think that goes to the race to the bottom and this idea that everything needs to be cheaper. And what is the cost? Maxine Bredat wrote the book called Unraveled, and she traces the life of a garment and talks about how, you know, there are factories, and they're mostly in Asia, where they have major contracts with the fast fashion brands, and they dump the chemicals, the dyeing chemicals, directly into the waterways, into the river. And it's like, why is that item cheap? Again, because some corner was cut at some point. And that means instead of collecting the chemicals and treating them and disposing of them appropriately, you're pouring them directly into waterways. And so that's something I think that needs to shift. And one thing Maxine now introduced, or is like helping steward this bill on the New York State level, called the Fashion Act. And so one of the things that it would do is require major fashion brands that have like over $100 million in revenue per year to trace most of their supply chain. Because right now they try to say, and they kind of successfully do say, well, we don't know.
Yeah.
We're blind to it. We're willfully blind to like what happens. And then this was saying, no, you actually need to know what factories are you using, where you're getting this material from, and if there are human or environmental harms in your supply chain, then you get fined for it. And so I think that's also this idea of like, how do we put the fines back onto corporations in that type of legislation? It's something like the Fashion Act, making the big fashion responsible for harms in their supply chain. That's a way in which you can put fines onto the corporation and not really involve the consumer in that.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So if you support that, they'll need some support getting it passed in New York State.
The folks who suffer the most are immigrants and migrants globally. So I was wondering how you all are thinking about aligning with the immigrant rights movement. I'm very active in it. I know countless stories of folks unpaid labor, but also we can't forget like how the climate crisis it has accelerated patterns of migration. So how are you all thinking about partnering or aligning with immigrant rights?
We think about it a lot. Like, we think that the work we do is like directly tied to the rights of people who are being impacted by this. And also, we know that a lot of the products that we get are going to be donated to marginalized communities. And so we don't charge the nonprofits to sign up. They don't pay a fee to use the platform. It is free for the nonprofit to use this. And so that is something that I'm really passionate about. I know that when I was working more on the in the animal rights sphere, I know there's a lot of like immigrant workers who are doing factory farming, and that was one of the main reasons that I stopped eating meat, dairy, and eggs, because the people who were being put in these conditions are not. It's not right. And so that was really kind of what like radicalized me first, was like learning about that industry. So there's definitely more work to be done on our side in that area for sure. But I feel like we're somewhat acknowledging and supporting it today, but we're also only a 3-year-old company. So we'll continue to grow into that.
Yeah, I know in California there was a bill a few years ago in the fashion industry where they said instead of it was common for people to get paid by the piece, which would result in an hourly rate that was well below the actual state minimum, and then saying no, that is no longer going to happen, and that was mostly immigrants who are doing the sewing, and instead you're going to make sure you're getting paid at least like an hourly wage. I don't know if that's as much an issue in New York, but feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, because of like I don't know about California has actually like a huge clothing manufacturing industry, in New York, to my knowledge, doesn't. But if you know more about it,
I know something now.
Okay, cool. Yeah. Yeah.
As PCC2 is like so groundbreaking, I still think that there needs to be a lot more investigating done in New York, because I've actually walked by some very sketchy factories and had no way of getting reporting. Wow. Like, just even in my own neighborhood, Sunset Park, Brooklyn, right from those states where I found there's a factory lighting, and I'm a little designer, so I'm like, we spent there like sketch all workers like they're this person and they were like squirting out a door.
Wow.
That's not a normal factory situation. There are a lot of places in New York that are clean corners, and I think there needs to be like more investigation for sure. But I don't know, I want the Fashion Act to be more thorough, or the Fabric Act, or any of these things to really like see what's going on. I bet you a lot of these
No, I think that's a great point, and I think that's really that's eye-opening to me that that's happening.
Well, I know we're coming up on time. I know that you mentioned a few books. I have a few books to mention as well for folks that are interested in reading or reading more. Cradle to Cradle is a book that I always recommend for folks who are more interested in learning more about the space. It's a great book, pretty accessible. Please don't buy it on Amazon.
I always I personally look on eBay first for like a secondhand copy. Yeah, I think it's a good hack.
It's called Cradle to Cradle. I'll plug bookshop.org, which if you're looking to buy a book, they donate to local bookstores. So secondhand is always better, but
Ave Books.
what?
Ave Books, ABE.
ABE
The second
books.
It's all secondhand
Yeah,
nice.
and independent bookstore retailing online.
Very cool. So Cradle to Cradle is my recommendation if you haven't read that one yet. And any books you want to recommend? I know you can talk about Unravel.
Yeah, Unraveled for the fashion industry. All We Can Save by Dr. Ayanna Elizabeth Johnson and Catherine Wilkinson. Consumed by Aja Barber. I'm really enjoying this course, Zen and the Art of Saving the Planet by Plum Village. And kind of a more spiritual elements to, because I feel like that's been in my sustainability journey, but not quite enough. So if you're also like looking, it's like more zoomed out. So if you're looking for like some spiritual nourishment, I really recommend it. And then also the QR code.
Yeah. So I was gonna try to look it up while you were talking, but I was so like intrigued. Like, there's another book that came to mind that I read recently. It's called Modern Slavery in the Supply Chain, and it's a compliance roadmap, and it's about 95 pages. But it's this guy who just goes into factories and like finds out what's really happening. And I could not put this book down. I was like, there's like 10 people in the world with his job, and I'm like, man, like, if I wasn't doing lipidonate, like, I would be all over this, like, and he just, like, really gets in there and finds out what's going on, so, I thought that was also really cool.
Title again?
It's called, oh my gosh, it's called Modern Slavery in the Supply Chain, A Guide to Compliance, something like that. It's very textbook-esque, but it's still pretty readable. And then for everyone who's at the event today, we are offering free donations. I know that a lot of folks weren't able to bring their things here in the rain, or they might have more items at home. And so there's these QR codes here and in the room where the clothing swap is happening, that if you scan this QR code and pull it up on your browser, you'll get a free donation on the platform. So you could donate a box, a bag, and a local nonprofit will either come pick it up from you, or we'll give you a shipping label, depending on what it is that you've uploaded to the platform. So we'd love to see everyone here donate something if they have that available on the platform.
So on your Instagram, can you post the list of books that you have suggested? And then also, how much does it usually cost to donate?
It depends on the size of the item. So for consumers, it's usually between $10 and $20 to donate an item, or to donate a box full of items. For retailers, we charge substantially more than that. Cool. Any other last minute questions, or shall we go back to the swap? Cool. Well, thank you so much for coming, everybody. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
I know there's a few extra questions, so if anyone wants to stay behind,
I could stay here. Yeah.
We can answer more questions on one too.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye, Mom.
Oh.
I'd be shocked if my mom was not.
Oh.
Is it Sue Balloon?
Was it a live on Instagram?
I think it was Vimeo? Yeah, Vimeo, not Instagram.